In Shevi'i of Parshas BeChukotai, we deal with laws of what are called charamim. These are objects or land or animals that are made cherem. Cherem has various kinds of ways of translating it in context: segregated, set aside, dedicated, specified for in some kind of a legal way. So, for example, when we usually talk about a person being put into cherem, such as Spinoza was put into cherem, he's being designated as outside of the community. He's being segregated, set aside. And in this context of cherem, we have a pasuk at the beginning of Shvi, Kol cherem asher yacharam min ha'adam lo yipadeh. A person, cherem objects are designated for, but there is a possibility of redeeming certain things with money. In other words, the object was made cherem, and the person says, I'm going to give the value of that, and he's able to redeem the object. What about kol cherem asher yecharam min ha'adam lo yipadeh? Most you must, and yet we know that a person can say, I'm going to give myself, I'm going to give, which means the value of self. And we know it in modern times that there's a whole a profession in which people make the assessment of the value of a person based upon how much he could have earned were he not to have suffered some kind of injury or illness, particularly in the case of torts, where damages are being demanded from the other party that caused the injury, and so on and so forth. Kol cherem asher yacharam. The question is, what is the price of a man? Okay, so what are we talking about here? So Rashi follows the position in Chazal in his explanation. Kol cherem asher yacharam. Rashi says the case is very specific. Hayotze lehareg, a person who has been sentenced to death, and he's on his way to the execution, and the Amar echad, and another person sees this person, and he says, Erko alai, I'll give the value of this person, right? Erko alai, what is the value of this person? Lo yipodeh, ein lo damim v'lo erech. Lo yipodeh means you can't redeem him because he has no value. In other words, it's meaningless to say about a person who's on his way to death that he has a value. Okay, so it's a very technical understanding. The Ramban cites and seems to favor another interpretation, an interpretation with far-reaching conclusions in many societies, and in perhaps not about as far as the death penalty or a person who is sentenced to death, but in many ways of the way we look at the world. And the Ramban follows the following line of interpretation: that somebody is being sent to be executed, and he says, you know what? I'm actually worth a lot of money, so I'm going to pay instead of being executed, and I'll give my money away for this. In other words, my value, it's the value that the person who is being executed, or somebody else would say, right, that the Ramban, I'll quote the Ramban, V'yesh mehem omrim shehu azhara, this is a lotase, a warning, l'chayvei mitot, for those people who are chayav, who are obligated to suffer the death penalty. She'ein lochim mehem kofer lefatron. You can't take kofer, which in this case we perhaps would call blood money. You can't redeem them to exempt them. In other words, right, you can't buy pardons. You can't buy pardons. Right? There are many things we can buy. But there are some things which are not merchandise and can't be sold. So here we come to the issue of when we talk about the worth of something, particularly the worth of a person. On one level, we're talking about worth and we're measuring it the way we measure things in the physical world. And then there's a concept. There is, I'll call it not worth, but the question of worthiness. And there are people who want to, if I play on the word a little bit, there are people who say that to have great wealth is the meaning of everything and the significance of their life. And there are people who say the wealthiness of life is not what you have, but what you've given to others. It's not what you have by which you are measured, by what you have, but rather by what you have given. The not, and this means it's not only a technical issue, certainly not as Rashi would have it, nor even as, even though it's wider, of the Ramban but it's about everyone, all of us. What is the measure? What is the measure of a man? What is the measure of a person? Okay, their measure is their bank account, or the measure is the amount of charity, the amount of wealth that they've donated to those in great need. And with this thought, I'll just tell a story that I heard from my father. Some of you may have heard this before from me, but I remember as a child being probably about 12 or 13 years old, being very moved by this. We lived in that time in Long Branch, New Jersey. This is in the mid-1950s. And my father was the rabbi, and he was in shul in his office, and an elderly woman came into his office. She wanted to speak with him, and she was schlepping a pillow and along with her. And the point of what she came to speak to my father about was that she wanted, when she was buried, she wanted to make sure that the rabbi knew that she must be buried with her head on this pillow, which is a strange kind of a thing, like, don't know what Chevra Kadishas would say about it, but it was brought to my father. So my father asked this woman what the story was of this request. So she said, I live in a very, very large house. At one time, Long Branch was a very, very, very luxurious playground for very wealthy people. It then moved on to Deal, and then Deal, without getting into the history of the story. But when Long Branch itself began to decline, their houses were sold for not much, and she bought this large house and turned it into a place for summer guests. Not the whole house, it was made into little apartments, and people would come from the city, from New York, and spend a couple weeks with their family. It was like a house became sort of like a bungalow colony, okay? And they'd be in the beach all day. And that's what she did. And she said, all the profit that I make from this enterprise, the profit, she had enough to live on anyway, but the profit, all the profit, I give to charity. I give to tzedakah. But I only require one thing from every tzedakah that they must send me a receipt. Okay? And I take all the receipts and I put it in this pillowcase. And this pillowcase I guess it looked like a pillow in there. This pillowcase is just a collection of years of receipts to tzedakah, to charity. Of course, my father told me the story because he was moved by it, and I have never forgotten that story. It's a moving story. It's not true that you can't take it with you. What you take with you is not what you have now, but what you've given away in your life. Ki lo b'moto yikach hakol, lo yered acharov kavodo. When he was 16 years old, Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, the Rav of Yerushalayim, wrote in his journal that this chapter of Tehillim, which we say in the house of the mourner, the Beit Ovel, that has the pasuk, man, lo b'moto, not in his death does he take, and usually translation is anything, lo yered acharov kavodo, no matter how much honor and glory he had in his life, he can't take it with him. And he wrote as a young boy, since it says his glory can't take with him, it's implied that there's something that a person can take with him. So it says, Ki lo b'moto yikach hakol. He can't take everything, but there's something he can take with him. So what we think makes people, this is what he wrote, what we think, what people usually think, what makes a person honorable and significant is what he has, he can't take with him, right? What he can take with him is what he doesn't have, that which he's given away. And this is the idea that we have in this understanding of the Ramban. The end of BeChukotai.